Imagine this. A submarine, 90 meters long, slowly glides through the water and disappears inside a mountain. No, this is not science fiction, and not frames from a movie. This is reality that for 30 years was the main military secret of the Soviet Union. Under a mountain in Crimea, an entire underground city was built for submarines. 600 meters of tunnels carved through solid rock, docks the size of a football field, warehouses with nuclear torpedoes. And the most incredible thing, this city could withstand a direct hit from an atomic bomb. The walls were reinforced with concrete 4.5 meters thick, designed to protect against nuclear blasts of 100 kilotons, 5 times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Nagasaki. Stalin himself personally reviewed and endorsed the Balaklava project, understanding its critical importance to Soviet defense strategy. For 30 years, the small town of Balaklava did not exist on maps at all. It was erased, as if it was not there. Only someone with a special pass from the KGB could enter. 3,000 people worked in the underground city and kept silent. Disclosure of the secret meant prison. The town closed to the public for more than 30 years due to the submarine base that was situated there, and almost the entire population of Balaklava worked at the facility or supported it. The town's electricity was regularly shut off at night when submarines entered or exited, so locals would not see the movements through the narrow harbor entrance. Armed guards patrolled constantly, and anyone caught trying to photograph the area faced immediate arrest and interrogation. American satellites saw that something was happening in Balaklava Bay, but what exactly, they could not understand. Submarines entered the mountain and vanished. Where? How? What was inside? Intelligence analysts in Washington studied satellite photos for years, but the camouflage was so perfect they could never determine the true nature of the facility. The entrance was disguised to look like a natural cave formation, and special camouflage netting was deployed whenever American satellites passed overhead. The CIA suspected something was there, but they never imagined the true scale. An entire underground submarine repair facility capable of housing 10 submarines simultaneously. Inside was an entire world, spanning more than 10,000 square meters of underground space. Underground docks where up to 7 submarines could be repaired simultaneously in the main channel, with capacity for 14 submarines of different classes in all water channels. An arsenal with hundreds of torpedoes, including nuclear ones with yields of several kilotons. One such torpedo could destroy an entire aircraft carrier and its escort ships within kilometers. Living quarters for 1,500 military personnel. Dining halls that could feed hundreds at once. Medical units with operating rooms and dental facilities. Command center equipped with the most advanced communications equipment of the era. Bakeries to make fresh bread. Recreation rooms. Autonomous life support system for 30 days. Water from deep artesian wells. Filtered air that could remove radioactive particles. Electricity from diesel generators with 9,500 tons of fuel storage. Food supplies stockpiled in vast warehouses. The facility was designed as a reserve command post for the entire Black Sea fleet, in case Sevastopol was destroyed. And all of this under a layer of rock and concrete that no bomb could penetrate. The mountain above reached 130 meters high, with reinforced concrete adding another 4.5 meters of protection. So, let us begin from the very beginning of this incredible story. Balaklava is a small town on the southern shore of Crimea, just a few kilometers from heroic Sevastopol, the strategic port that Russia has used to project power across the Black Sea and beyond for more than 200 years. If you look at the map carefully, Balaklava is located in a very unusual and strategically advantageous place. In a narrow bay that cuts into the shore like a long corridor, surrounded by high mountains on both sides rising dramatically from the water. The bay is so narrow and the entrance so concealed that from the sea its entrance is almost invisible. Cliffs block the entrance on both sides, and if you do not know exactly where to look, you can sail past within a few hundred meters and not even notice that there is a harbor here. This feature made Balaklava an ideal location, with easy access to the Black Sea while remaining hidden from enemy observation. Ancient Greeks, 2,500 years ago, around the 5th century before Christ, founded a colony here and called it Symbolon, meaning sign or symbol. According to another version, harbor or safe haven. In any case, even then people appreciated the uniqueness of this place for sheltering ships from storms and enemies. Throughout its long and turbulent history, spanning more than 2,000 years, Balaklava was owned by Greeks, Romans, Byzantines, Genoese merchants who built the fortress, Turks, and finally, Russians. Each civilization recognized the immense strategic value of this hidden harbor and used it for military purposes, as a trading post, as a refuge. The Genoese built the impressive Cembalo fortress on the heights above the bay in the 14th century, ruins of which still stand today as silent witnesses to centuries of history. Catherine II, known as Catherine the Great, annexed Crimea to Russia in 1783 after defeating the Ottoman Empire, and Balaklava became a Russian city. Small, provincial, but with a rich history and unique location that would one day make it the site of one of the most ambitious and secretive military construction projects ever undertaken anywhere in the world. For decades, it remained a quiet fishing village where life moved slowly and peacefully. In 1853–56, dramatic events of the Crimean War unfolded here that would make Balaklava famous throughout Europe. The British, French, and Turks formed an alliance and attacked Russia, landed massive invasion forces in Crimea, and laid siege to Sevastopol for almost a year. Balaklava Bay became the main base of the entire British fleet and army. It was here, near Balaklava, on the 25th of October 1854, that a famous battle took place, where British cavalry, the Light Brigade consisting of about 600 men, received confused orders and attacked heavily defended Russian artillery positions in what became known as one of the most disastrous military blunders in history. The attack was utterly suicidal. The British suffered catastrophic losses, with 200 men killed or wounded in 20 minutes. But this battle went down in history and was even glorified in poetry by Alfred Lord Tennyson, who wrote, "Into the valley of death rode the 600." After the war ended, Balaklava returned to being a sleepy town, but its name had entered the history books. The Great Patriotic War, as Russians call World War II, did not bypass Balaklava either. In October 1941, German troops under General Erich von Manstein captured almost all of Crimea after fierce fighting, including Balaklava. Terrible months of occupation began, with brutal repression against local population, mass executions, deportations. The Nazis used Balaklava as a base for their own naval operations. But already in May 1944, Soviet troops liberated Sevastopol and Balaklava in an offensive that involved hundreds of thousands of soldiers in fierce urban combat fighting. The city was heavily destroyed by artillery and bombing, many buildings reduced to rubble, but it was restored with determination and Soviet planning. And then the Cold War began, a new global conflict that would transform this quiet fishing town into something unprecedented in military engineering. It was in the late 40s and early 50s, as tensions escalated dangerously between the Soviet Union and the United States after they became enemies instead of World War II allies, that Soviet military strategists and naval planners turned their attention to the unique features of Balaklava Bay.
Having seen the widespread and horrifying destruction caused by atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945, entire cities vaporized in seconds, hundreds of thousands killed instantly, Stalin ordered the construction of defense facilities specifically designed to protect Soviet submarines from nuclear attack. He understood that future war would be fought with nuclear weapons of unimaginable power. Narrow entrance hidden by rocks on both sides, deep water reaching 8.5 meters, sufficient for submarines. High mountains around reaching 130 meters, providing natural shielding.
And most importantly, proximity to Sevastopol, the main base of the Black Sea Fleet, with its naval infrastructure. But at the same time, distance from large population centers, which is important for a secret facility that must remain hidden. The two superpowers were stepping up their nuclear arsenals at frightening pace, threatening each other with preemptive strikes and retaliatory strikes, building thousands of warheads. The world lived in constant fear of nuclear annihilation. What if they built here not an ordinary base for submarines, but something completely new, unprecedented in military history? What if they created an underground base, protected from any enemy strikes? A nuclear-proof fortress that could survive Armageddon itself. A base inside the mountain, where submarines would enter directly from the sea through an underground tunnel like entering a cave. Where they would be in complete safety from bombs and missiles, where no enemy could reach them. Where they could be repaired and prepared for combat missions, while being reliably hidden from enemy eyes and reconnaissance. Where Soviet submarine commanders could plan nuclear retaliation even as the world burned above. The idea seemed fantastic, almost like something from a science fiction novel. But Soviet leaders were deadly serious. Joseph Stalin, the Soviet dictator who ruled with an iron fist, gave Lavrenti Beria, who was responsible at that time for all nuclear projects and secret weapons development, a secret directive marked Top Secret Special Importance, to find a place where they could house submarines specifically designed for a retaliatory nuclear strike. This was the doctrine of second strike capability. Even if America destroyed Moscow and other Soviet cities in a surprise attack, Soviet submarines hidden in this fortress could emerge and destroy American cities in revenge. Mutual assured destruction. But Soviet engineers loved complex tasks and impossible challenges. If it is technically possible, it means it will be done. No obstacle was too great. The project was presented to the highest military leadership, including marshals and admirals, then to Nikita Sergeyevich Khrushchev himself, who succeeded Stalin after his death in 1953, and who at that time headed the Soviet Union with characteristic bombast. Khrushchev approved the idea enthusiastically and allocated huge funds from the defense budget, millions of rubles that could have built entire cities. The project received the code name Object 825 GTS, where GTS stood for Government Secret of Secrecy, the highest classification level. The name itself said, "This will be something special, something that must remain hidden at all costs." Documents were stamped with red ink and locked in safes. In 1953, actual construction work began in earnest, though it would take 8 long and difficult years to complete the enormous project. In 1957, a special construction department, coded as number 528, was created specifically to handle the construction of this and other underground facilities across the Soviet Union. This was part of a massive program to build nuclear-resistant command posts and military bases. Military builders from construction battalions, experienced engineers with university degrees, and geologists began arriving in quiet Balaklava on trains and trucks. They arrived not in crowds, but in small groups, so as not to attract attention from foreign spies. To ensure maximum secrecy, supplies were transported at night on barges in the open sea rather than through the visible harbor. Local residents were told that an important defense facility would be built for protecting the motherland. Details were not disclosed, and questions were not welcome. Everyone was warned about non-disclosure under threat of serious criminal liability. The penalties for revealing even the smallest detail could be severe. 10 to 20 years in prison camps in Siberia under Article 58 for treason. First of all, teams of geologists, armed with drilling equipment, surveyed Mount Tavros, which towered impressively right at the entrance to Balaklava Bay, rising 130 meters above sea level. They drilled exploratory wells, going down hundreds of meters, took rock samples from different depths, studied the detailed structure and composition of the mountain. They needed to make absolutely sure that the rock was strong enough and stable, that it would withstand massive tunnel excavation without collapsing, that there would be no catastrophic collapses or landslides that could kill workers. The drilling revealed predominantly limestone rock formations, which was both a blessing and a major challenge. Hard enough to be structurally stable and not crumble, but extremely difficult to excavate, requiring explosives. Geologists gave a positive conclusion after months of study. The rock is solid and suitable. Excavation is definitely possible, but will require a lot of time and enormous effort, and probably some casualties. Throughout the entire construction process, lasting 8 years, about 120,000 tons of rock would be removed from Mount Tavros and hauled away. That is equivalent to a pyramid. At the same time, in Moscow offices, teams of architects and military engineers were developing detailed technical designs for the future base, working day and night. Everything had to be calculated down to the smallest detail with precision. The exact length and width of the tunnel, the size of underground docks to accommodate different submarine classes, the location of all rooms, including storage and living quarters, ventilation system capacity, water supply infrastructure, electricity generation and distribution, communications equipment. An error at the design stage could result in catastrophe during construction or operation. Cave-ins, flooding, asphyxiation. Soviet engineers were meticulous and methodical. They calculated this way. The tunnel must be wide enough for a submarine to enter safely with clearance, but not too wide so as not to weaken the mountain structure and cause collapse. They settled on a width of 10 meters and a height of about 10 meters, just barely sufficient. Water depth in the tunnel, 8.5 meters at high tide, sufficient for passage of diesel-electric submarines in surface position with their conning towers above water. Tunnel length, about 600 meters, precisely 602 meters to be exact, from the entrance in the bay to the main underground dock, deep in the very heart of the mountain. This meant boring through hundreds of meters of solid limestone rock. At the end of the tunnel, they planned to create a huge hall, the main dock at 22 meters wide, where up to 7 submarines could be accommodated simultaneously for repair and maintenance in the central channel alone, with space for more in side channels. From this massive hall, other tunnels were to branch out like arteries, to ammunition warehouses storing thousands of torpedoes, to living quarters for crews, to the command center that would coordinate operations, to auxiliary services, including workshops and storage. The base would be divided into 2 separate areas, north and south of the water channel, with no underground connection between the two for security reasons, providing additional protection. If one side was compromised or destroyed, the other could continue functioning. All this had to be carved out of solid rock, using primitive tools and tremendous human labor. The total internal area would cover more than 10,000 square meters, the size of 2 football fields. In the spring of 1957, intensive work began with thousands of workers arriving daily. First, they built a high fence around the entire construction site, topped with barbed wire, posted armed guards with orders to shoot intruders on site without warning. No outsiders were allowed under any circumstances, and signs warned, "Restricted military zone, deadly force authorized." Then they began excavating the entrance tunnel, using the most brutal and dangerous methods known to Soviet engineering at that time. The work was absolutely brutal, exhausting, and claimed many lives that were never officially recorded. First, teams of drillers with pneumatic equipment drilled many blast holes deep in the rock face. Deep, cylindrical holes, 30 to 50 centimeters deep, where high explosives would be laid in carefully calculated patterns. They worked with heavy jackhammers weighing 20 kilograms that roared and vibrated so loud that ears rang for hours, even with earplugs and protective equipment that barely helped. Dust stood in a thick column, obscuring vision. Visibility dropped to several meters at best. Breathing was extremely difficult, despite masks that quickly clogged with limestone powder. Workers coughed constantly, their lungs filling with dust. But they worked without complaint, because an order is an order from Moscow, because the country demands it for survival, because it is important for defense against American imperialism. 12-hour shifts were normal. When the blast holes were ready in geometric patterns, experienced miners laid military-grade explosives, ammonite, dynamite, TNT, in wooden boxes. The charges were connected with detonating cord in series. Electrical wires were led outside to a safe detonation point several hundred meters away. All workers evacuated from the tunnel quickly, went to a safe distance behind protective barriers made of sandbags, and waited. Then, the command, "Fire!" shouted by the foreman, and the rock shuddered from the massive explosion like an earthquake rippling through the ground. A dull roar carried across the entire bay, echoing off mountains. Birds flew up from the trees in panic, screaming. Local residents in the town flinched. Another explosion. They are building something again there, in the mountain. Something important and secret. The ground shook violently. Windows rattled in frames, and sometimes pieces of rock would fly out of the tunnel entrance, like deadly projectiles traveling hundreds of meters. Children learned not to play near the construction site. After the explosion, workers waited for the dust and smoke to settle for at least 30 to 40 minutes wearing masks, then carefully entered the tunnel, wearing masks and protective gear, and assessed the result with lanterns. Several tons of rock broken off from the cliff face in jagged chunks, lying in a heap of boulders ranging from fist-sized to several hundred kilograms. The no less difficult and physically exhausting work began. Removal of this rock, using mostly manual labor and simple equipment, because machinery could not fit in the narrow space yet. They loaded stone fragments into small carts by hand, using shovels, took them outside by narrow-gauge rail tracks, dumped them away from the construction site in growing piles, or used them for other needs. For example, for reinforcing the shore, for building roads through the area, for construction materials elsewhere. And so, day after day, without rest, week after week, month after month, without a single break, even on holidays. Drilled, blasted, removed, drilled again, in an endless, punishing cycle that broke men's bodies. The tunnel went deeper into the mountain at a rate of approximately 1 to 2 meters per day of progress. This may seem painfully slow to modern ears, but for such enormous scale and rock hardness, this was actually a normal pace for the primitive technology available at that time in the 1950s. They worked 3 full shifts around the clock, without stopping even for a moment. When one shift of exhausted men left to rest and eat, another fresh shift came in immediately and continued exactly where the previous shift left off, without losing time. Construction did not stop day or night, not even on Soviet holidays like May Day or Revolution Day, when the rest of the country celebrated. In winter, it was a bit easier physically. Cool temperatures, not so stuffy underground, though ice would form in some areas near the entrance and had to be chipped away. In summer, oppressive heat stood in the tunnel,
like being inside an oven. People were drenched in sweat that soaked through their clothes, drank water by the liter from buckets, and some collapsed from heat exhaustion and had to be carried out. But they worked without complaint because the Cold War was intensifying dangerously, and time was critical. And the motherland needed this base operational before war came. Of course, there were accidents and many deaths that were hushed up. With explosive work on this scale, there is always tremendous risk, and at this scale, the risks were enormous and deadly. Sometimes a charge went off at the wrong time due to faulty electrical detonators or misunderstanding signals, or a massive stone flew not where it was supposed to and struck workers, crushing them instantly. There were cave-ins almost weekly. Large pieces of rock broke off from the tunnel ceiling without warning and fell down, crushing anyone beneath under tons of stone. Bodies had to be dug out. People died regularly from explosions tearing them apart, cave-ins crushing them, equipment accidents, falls from scaffolding.
The exact number of those who died during construction of the base is still classified top secret even today, more than 60 years later. But according to some estimates from witnesses and leaked documents and witness accounts from survivors, dozens of people lost their lives, perhaps as many as 100. They were buried quietly in unmarked graves. Families were paid modest compensation and told their loved ones died in construction accidents serving the motherland. New workers were recruited to come in their place, and construction continued without pause or memorial. Gradually, step by step, meter by painful meter, the tunnel went deeper into the mountain, like a giant worm boring through solid stone, leaving a cylindrical void. After a year and a half of continuous work, by the end of 1958, they had already excavated about 300 meters, halfway to the goal, and morale improved. Another year and a half later, by mid-1960, they finally reached the place deep inside, where the main dock was planned, deep inside the mountain, in a natural cavity. They began expanding the space dramatically, using larger explosive charges, creating a huge hall that would become the beating heart of the entire operation and submarine repair facility. The blasting had to be done extremely carefully here, to avoid bringing down the entire mountain on top of them in a catastrophic collapse that would bury everything. Parallel to excavating the main tunnel, intensive work was underway to create side rooms and secondary passages branching off. From the main tunnel, other smaller tunnels branched off at carefully calculated angles, based on engineering drawings, leading to future warehouses for supplies, living quarters for crews, technical compartments housing machinery, and the critical nuclear arsenal storage facility, where atomic torpedoes would be kept. All this also had to be carved out of rock using the same brutal methods, reinforced with steel supports and concrete many meters thick, equipped with heavy doors and sophisticated systems. The scope of the excavation was truly mind-boggling for the era. They were creating an entire underground city, complete with everything needed for thousands of people to live. Concrete was brought from factories far away, by trucks and barges traveling through the night. Mortar was prepared right on site in huge rotating mixers, poured into wooden formwork constructed by skilled carpenters and workers. They concreted walls, ceilings, floors with precision and attention following blueprints exactly. Thickness of concrete walls, from 1 to 1.5 meters minimum, with double reinforcement with metal mesh and steel rebar for strength. The reinforced concrete walls around the base were 4.5 meters thick in some critical areas, especially near the entrance and around the arsenal. Such walls could withstand enormous pressure from millions of tons of mountain above, could even withstand a close nuclear explosion of 100 kilotons yield directly overhead. Soviet builders did not economize on strength following orders. They made it with a massive margin of safety, building for centuries, not decades, building to survive nuclear war. By the end of 1960, after 7 years of dangerous labor, the main construction work was completed according to schedule. The tunnel was carved completely from entrance to main dock, 600 meters through solid mountain. All side rooms were created with precision according to specifications. Everything was concreted to exact specifications. When completed in 1961, it was given the official code name Object 825 GTS. The next stage began. Equipping the base with sophisticated systems, installing expensive equipment imported from all over the Soviet Union, laying communications that would make this underground facility functional and capable of repairing submarines. When the stonecutters and blasters finished their work and moved on to other secret projects elsewhere, teams of installers, electricians, plumbers, ventilation specialists came to the facility. All those specialized technicians who were supposed to turn bare tunnels into a functioning military base that could operate autonomously even during nuclear war. First of all, they tackled ventilation, the most critical system for underground survival and the most complex engineering challenge. Without proper ventilation, it is simply impossible to be in underground rooms for extended periods. Air quickly becomes stale and toxic, stuffy and unbreathable. Carbon dioxide concentration rises to dangerous levels. Oxygen depletes. People begin to suffocate and die within hours. A powerful forced ventilation system was absolutely needed that would provide constant supply of fresh air and removal of exhaust air even during nuclear war when the surface might be contaminated. On top of Mount Tavros, 130 meters above, they drilled several deep vertical ventilation shafts that came out directly into the main dock and other rooms of the base deep below. Fresh air was sucked in from the surface through these narrow shafts by powerful electric fans. But simply sucking in air was not enough for survival. They had to account for the terrifying possibility of radioactive or chemical contamination in case of nuclear or chemical war raging above. Therefore, at the air intake on the surface, they installed a multi-stage filter system of military grade, designed to remove any contaminant. First, air passed through mechanical filters with fine mesh that trapped dust and large particles. Then through filters packed with activated carbon that absorbed poisonous chemical substances and chemical weapons like nerve gas. Then through special radiation filters with lead shielding that trapped radioactive particles from nuclear fallout that would kill anyone breathing it. Only after passing through all these stages of purification was air finally supplied to the base rooms deep underground. This system could protect people even with severe radioactive contamination of the area after a nuclear explosion, allowing the base to function exactly as designed for 30 days. Powerful industrial-grade electric fans, each weighing several tons, provided constant air circulation throughout the facility at high volume. The noise from them was constant and loud, like the roar of jet engines. Workers eventually got used to it over time. Their ears adapted and stopped noticing the hum. But thanks to this constant noise and air movement, it was possible to breathe normally in the underground city. It was possible to live and work for extended periods. The temperature inside the base was kept around 15 degrees Celsius year-round, regardless of outside conditions, using the natural insulation of the mountain. Perfect climate control. The next important system, water supply for thousands of men working and living underground. The base was supposed to have thousands of people at full capacity. Everyone needed water daily, for drinking, for washing and hygiene, for technical needs like cooling equipment, for fighting fires that could break out. They drilled several artesian wells several hundred meters deep, going far down, that reached underground aquifer layers naturally protected from surface contamination and radiation. Water from these wells deep underground was clean, pure, protect it from surface contamination and radiation fallout.
Water was pumped up by powerful electric pumps to huge underground reservoir tanks, where it was stored in massive quantities, measured in thousands of cubic meters. The volume of these tanks, thousands of cubic meters, water supply sufficient for 1 full month of completely autonomous existence of the base, even if the surface was uninhabitable wasteland. From the tanks, pipes made of steel went to all rooms throughout the complex, to living cabins for sailors, to showers for washing, to the dining hall for cooking, to technical compartments, to the dry dock for submarine operations. Sewerage was also carefully thought through by experienced Soviet engineers who planned everything. All drains from toilets and sinks were collected in underground collectors that led to treatment facilities built into the complex. Treated water was discharged into the sea through hidden pipes extending underwater, and solid waste was collected and eventually removed periodically. The system was autonomous and reliable, capable of handling the waste of 3,000 people under wartime conditions. Power supply. That is a separate story, requiring its own detailed explanation. The base consumed huge amounts of electricity, lighting throughout, ventilation fans, water pumps, cranes, machine tools, household appliances, communications equipment, everything. In normal peacetime mode, electricity was supplied from external networks, from the Sevastopol municipal power grid through hidden underground cables that could not be seen. But in case of war or accident cutting external power completely, several powerful diesel generators were installed at the base that could provide full autonomous power supply indefinitely, as long as fuel lasted. Generators ran on diesel fuel, which was stored in massive underground tanks holding 9,500 tons. Enough fuel for a month. Fuel supply. For a month of continuous operation at full capacity without resupply from outside. The generators were installed in a separate, specially built room, with powerful soundproofing walls several meters thick. Otherwise, the tremendous roar from them running would spread throughout the base and make work impossible and deafen everyone. Lighting was powerful throughout the entire facility. Hundreds of fluorescent lamps throughout all tunnels and rooms, providing bright, daylight-level illumination so work could continue 24 hours. In the main dock, the light was such that you could read a small print newspaper in any corner without strain or shadows. This is critically important for work. Mechanics and technicians need to see exactly what they are doing when repairing submarines. Mistakes are absolutely unacceptable when working on complex nuclear-capable submarines. In the main dock, they installed powerful overhead cranes with lifting capacity of several tons that ran on rails along the walls mounted high up. These cranes could lift and move heavy equipment, torpedoes weighing over a ton each, massive diesel engines, battery packs weighing tons, hull sections, anything needed. All this was needed for submarine repair and maintenance operations that happened constantly. Along the dock walls, they built sturdy concrete piers where submarines were moored securely with thick ropes. Piers were equipped with everything necessary for submarine servicing: electrical outlets for connecting shore power systems that could power the entire submarine, flexible hoses for supplying fresh water, compressed air for pneumatic systems, diesel fuel for refueling, telephone communication systems connecting to command. A submarine moored at such a well-equipped pier could turn off its internal systems completely and switch to base power, which saved resources and fuel and made it possible to conduct thorough repairs while the crew rested in better conditions. From the main dock, multiple tunnels branched off in different directions to storage facilities of various types, storing everything needed. The most important and most heavily guarded, the arsenal, where torpedoes were stored under maximum security, with armed guards 24 hours. This was a long tunnel, about 100 meters, divided by thick concrete bulkheads into separate compartments for maximum safety. In case of an accidental explosion in one compartment, the bulkhead was designed and supposed to contain the explosion and not let it spread to other compartments and destroy the entire facility in a chain reaction. Torpedoes of various types were stored on special steel racks bolted to the floor, secured with chains and protected from accidental impacts that could cause detonation of the warheads. There were ordinary, conventional torpedoes with high explosive warheads designed for sinking ships and submarines. There were dummy torpedoes for training exercises and testing, and there were the special ones with nuclear warheads of terrifying destructive power. Only specially trained officers who passed the strictest verification by KGB and had the appropriate highest level security clearance were allowed access to these nuclear weapons. Armed guards with machine guns patrolled this area constantly, around the clock. A nuclear torpedo is a terrible weapon of mass destruction, unlike anything else. One such torpedo, detonated under an aircraft carrier in close proximity, could destroy that massive carrier and all escort ships within a radius of several kilometers in a single massive blast and fireball. Power of the nuclear charge, from several kilotons to tens of kilotons of TNT equivalent, comparable to or exceeding the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima that killed 100,000 people.
The arsenal of the Balaklava Bay stored several dozen such nuclear torpedoes at any given time, ready for use. Research laboratories of almost all the Soviet Navy's departments were located in Balaklava, supporting the nuclear program. This was a nightmare scenario for American admirals planning their carrier groups. They knew that Soviet submarines with nuclear torpedoes were somewhere nearby in the Black Sea, lurking beneath the waves. But where exactly? Unknown and unknowable. The threat was constant, invisible, and terrifying, and kept admirals awake at night. During the Cold War, the complex was also used to store the Black Sea Fleet's nuclear-tipped torpedoes and short-range missiles with atomic warheads. Other warehouses were less secret, but no less important for daily operations. Warehouses of spare parts for submarines, engines weighing tons, pumps, electric motors, batteries, instruments, valves, seals, all the thousands of components needed to keep submarines operational. Food warehouses, canned goods stacked to the ceiling, crackers in wooden boxes, cereals in sacks, sugar, salt, tea, everything that can be stored for long periods without refrigeration. Warehouses with diesel fuel in barrels, oils, lubricants in drums. Warehouses with medicines and surgical supplies, with uniforms and boots, with tools and specialized equipment. All this was needed to support the life and work of the base and keep submarines operational and ready for combat. Living quarters for permanent personnel were furnished modestly, in typical military fashion, without any luxury or comfort. Small cabins with metal bunk beds where 4 to 6 people slept in cramped conditions with personal lockers. Common washrooms with sinks, showers with basic facilities providing hot water, toilets. Dining hall for several hundred people at once, where they fed 3 times a day on schedule. Military ration, hearty and caloric, but monotonous and repetitive. Smoking rooms where sailors could rest between shifts, smoke cigarettes, chat with comrades, and play cards or chess. There was a fully equipped medical unit with an operating room for surgery, X-ray equipment for diagnosing injuries, dental chair for dental work and tooth extraction. Military doctors at the base could provide any medical assistance, from treating a common cold to performing emergency surgical operations on injured personnel who got hurt. The command center was located in the most protected part of the base, under the maximum layer of rock and concrete for maximum protection from attack. This was a small bunker within a bunker, with especially thick walls and hermetic steel doors that could seal completely, creating an airtight space. Here was the base headquarters and the reserve command post for the entire Black Sea Fleet in case Sevastopol was destroyed. From here, all operations were controlled and coordinated by senior officers. Modern communications equipment for those times made it possible to maintain contact with Sevastopol Naval Headquarters, with Moscow Central Command, with submarines at sea anywhere in the Black Sea or Mediterranean, through radio. Large maps on the walls showed the situation in the Black Sea region, the position of friendly and enemy ships updated constantly with pins and markers. In case of nuclear war, destroying everything on the surface, the command center could continue to function even if the entire surface was contaminated with lethal radiation, killing anyone exposed. Autonomous life support systems, food and water supplies stockpiled for 30 days, communications means, everything was provided for long-term survival underground. Staff officers could direct submarine actions, coordinate complex operations, transmit orders from Moscow, even as nuclear war raged above, killing millions. By the end of 1960, after 7 years of dangerous labor and sacrifice, all work on equipping the base was basically completed to specifications. They tested all systems thoroughly over weeks, checked ventilation to ensure proper airflow, water supply to ensure purity, electricity to ensure backup generators worked, communications. Everything worked perfectly according to plan and Soviet engineering. The facility was ready for acceptance by military inspectors from Moscow. In the spring of 1961, a solemn acceptance of Object 825 GTS by a state commission took place, with great ceremony and speeches. High-ranking military officials, including admirals and generals from Moscow, flew to Sevastopol. From there, on fast boats, reached Balaklava, walked through all the rooms of the base over several days, inspected everything carefully, checked systems personally, asked detailed technical questions of engineers. They were satisfied with the quality of construction and engineering excellence. The facility was officially accepted for operation with an excellent rating, the highest possible grade. Builders were awarded medals and honors, noted with substantial bonuses and promotions, their names entered into classified records that would remain secret for decades. And in that same 61, the first submarine entered the underground docks of Balaklava in a truly historic moment. This was truly a historic moment that would remain in memory of all who witnessed it. On a summer day in 1961, a submarine of Project 613, known to NATO intelligence as Whiskey Class, approached the entrance to Balaklava Bay cautiously. This was a diesel-electric torpedo submarine, one of the most numerous classes in the Soviet fleet, with hundreds built. Length, 76 meters, width, 7 meters, displacement, about 2,000 tons in surfaced position.
Crew, 54 experienced men who had trained for months for this historic moment and felt both excitement and nervousness. The submarine commander, a veteran with years of service, received an order through encrypted communication to enter the new secret base inside the mountain for the first time in history. Coordinates, call signs, passwords, everything was transmitted via secure communication channel known only to cleared personnel with top-secret clearance. The submarine slowly entered Balaklava Bay in broad daylight, moving at slow speed, passed by the ancient Genoese fortress Cembalo on top of the mountain, dating from the 14th century, past the piers where fishing boats stood with fishermen watching curiously. Local residents watched with great interest from their homes. Submarines were not often seen here in the bay, and this was unusual. They wondered what was happening, but knew better than to ask questions that could get them arrested. The submarine approached the place at the foot of Mount Tavros, where the entrance to the underground tunnel was carefully concealed behind camouflage. Massive metal blast gates, weighing 165 tons each, camouflaged to look like a natural rock outcrop from a distance, slowly parted to the sides on powerful hydraulic rams. The black maw of the tunnel opened dramatically, going into the depths of the mountain,
like the mouth of a sea monster swallowing prey. Lights inside flickered and came on, illuminating wet concrete walls glistening with condensation dripping down. The commander gave the command with steady voice, showing no emotion. "Slow ahead. Maintain center." The submarine's twin propellers slowly began to turn, and the huge steel cigar began to enter the tunnel, carefully and precisely. Clearance on each side between submarine hull and tunnel wall, only 1.5 meters. One wrong maneuver or current, and the submarine could hit the concrete wall, causing serious damage, or getting stuck blocking the tunnel. But the helmsman worked precisely, like a surgeon performing delicate surgery, responding instantly to every command from the commander with tiny adjustments. Slowly, carefully, meter by meter, the submarine entered the mountain, as crew members watched in silent amazement at what was happening. The crew stood at battle stations throughout the boat, each performing their assigned task with intense concentration. In the conning tower, the commander and navigator monitored movement closely, corrected course with small hand adjustments to the wheel. Ahead, along the tunnel, dark water stretched calm and still, illuminated by powerful searchlights mounted on the walls every 20 meters. On the sides, high concrete walls going up 10 meters to the arched ceiling. Overhead, the concrete vault of the tunnel curved gracefully, forming a perfect half-cylinder. The feeling was unusual, almost mystical and dreamlike, like entering another world. A submarine is sailing inside a mountain, in complete safety from attack. The submarine passed 602 meters of tunnel in approximately 20 minutes, at slow speed, barely moving. Slowly, carefully, without haste, engines at minimum power making almost no noise. And finally, bright light appeared ahead, growing brighter. This was the main underground dock, a huge hall full of light and space, carved from living rock. The submarine emerged from the dark tunnel into the dock and carefully maneuvered to the designated pier. The crew breathed a collective sigh of relief and satisfaction, and some smiled. It worked perfectly. The submarine successfully entered the underground base on the first attempt. The commander reported ashore with pride in his voice. "Mooring completed. Mission accomplished successfully." Those meeting on shore, engineers, builders, naval officers in dress uniforms, applauded enthusiastically and cheered. The history of the underground base in Balaklava officially began on that day. In the following months and years, more and more new submarines came here regularly. The base worked at full capacity around the clock. Simultaneously, in the dock, there could be up to 7 submarines in the main channel of medium class, and up to 9 submarines of smaller classes in all water channels, depending on configuration. Submarines of smaller projects, 613, 633, and the special nuclear-armed Project 615 submarines, could be accommodated several at a time in different sections. The work regime was intense, with strict schedules. Submarines came for scheduled maintenance every 3 weeks, for refueling, for rearming with torpedoes. The schedule was planned months ahead. When which submarine arrives, how long repairs take, when it returns to sea. Everything precise military style, without delays. Repairs ran on time during 30 years without major delay. Submarines always entered and exited only at night, so Balaklava's electricity was shut off completely during these hours to maintain secrecy. While work continued inside, outside, major changes transformed the town. In 1957, Balaklava received closed city status by decree. Entry was strictly restricted by military law. At the entrance, they set up a checkpoint with armed guards on duty around the clock. They checked everyone's documents without exception. Without permanent registration or a KGB-issued pass, entry was prohibited under penalty of arrest.
Even relatives couldn't visit without arranging permission weeks in advance through the KGB. From 1957 to 1991, 34 years, Balaklava did not exist on publicly available Soviet maps. On maps sold in stores and hung in schools, Balaklava's location showed either empty space or closed territory. Nothing at all. The city seemed to have vanished completely. For foreigners, Balaklava was absolutely inaccessible. Military patrols stopped suspicious vehicles several kilometers away at gunpoint. American spy satellites photographed the area regularly, but couldn't determine what was hidden there. Life in the closed city had pros and cons. Pros: much better supply than ordinary Soviet cities. Closed military cities received first priority for goods. In Balaklava, stores you could buy quality products that elsewhere were deficit. Good sausage, canned goods, imported items. Military personnel received free apartments, sanatorium vouchers, benefits, and better pay. Cons: constant surveillance, secrecy, movement restrictions. You couldn't leave permanently without permission. Couldn't tell relatives where you worked. Everything classified. Disclosure meant Article 64, treason, carrying 10 to 25 years in camps. KGB monitored everyone constantly. Children learned early. Never tell outsiders where Dad works or what you see. Never brag about submarines. Secrecy became second nature. Families lived in apartment buildings built for military. Houses were decent by Soviet standards, with plumbing, sewerage, central heating. Apartments small but acceptable. Yards had playgrounds, schools, kindergartens. They tried creating normal conditions. There were stores, house of culture with movies and concerts, library, clinic, post office. Everything like a normal Soviet town, except the checkpoint and the secret everyone knew but never spoke about. In summer, residents swam in the sea, sunbathed, fished.
Balaklava was beautiful, with mild climate and vineyards on mountain slopes. Meanwhile, the base operated at full capacity for decades. The Balaklava facility was designed specifically for servicing diesel-electric submarines of various classes. Submarines patrolled the Black Sea constantly, went through the Turkish Straits to the Mediterranean, monitored American carriers, collected intelligence. In case of war, they would attack NATO ships, disrupt communications, defend Soviet coasts. Nuclear torpedoes gave them devastating strike capability. One torpedo could destroy an entire carrier group. American admirals knew Soviet submarines with nuclear weapons lurked nearby, but not where exactly. The threat was constant and terrifying. In 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev came to power and began reforms called Perestroika and Glasnost. This was a time of hope, but also the beginning of the end. Gorbachev tried reforming the Soviet system to make it more open and democratic, but reforms spiraled out of control. In Soviet republics, national movements demanded independence. The economy collapsed, stores emptied, shortages worsened. In August 1991, hardline communists attempted a coup, the GKCHP, trying to stop the collapse. They brought troops to Moscow, but the coup failed. Boris Yeltsin took power. In December 1991, the Soviet Union officially ceased to exist. The red flag with hammer and sickle came down over the Kremlin, replaced by the Russian tricolor. The Union broke into 15 independent states. Ukraine declared independence. Crimea, Russian land for 200 years, found itself in another state.
The Black Sea Fleet, including Balaklava, became disputed between Russia and Ukraine. Long negotiations followed about dividing the fleet. They agreed. Part goes to Ukraine, part stays with Russia, leasing Sevastopol bases for 20 years.
But Balaklava wasn't included. They decided to close it. Why? First, the Cold War ended. Nuclear conflict threat decreased. The need for such a protected base disappeared. Second, maintaining it required huge funds Ukraine didn't have. Its economy was in crisis. In 1993, they decided to close Object 825 GTS. The last submarines left. They removed valuable equipment, dismantled secret systems. The massive gates closed, and the underground city emptied. The military left. The base stood empty. Rainwater seeped in. Mold grew. Metal rusted. Local residents sometimes penetrated through side exits, wandered tunnels looking for valuables. They said ghosts of dead sailors wandered there. The base became urban legend. Balaklava stopped being closed. The checkpoint was removed. Anyone could come. The city returned to maps. But life became harder. No work. The fleet gone. People left seeking better lives. In 2003, Ukrainian authorities made an unexpected decision. Open a museum on the former base's territory. This was reasonable. A unique facility could attract tourists and bring income. Work began clearing and preparing. They pumped out accumulated water, installed lighting, cleared tunnels, set up barriers in dangerous areas, created exhibitions with torpedoes, submarine models, photos and documents. In 2003, the museum Balaklava Underground Complex opened to visitors. First tours aroused enormous interest. People wanted to see what was secret for 30 years. Not only Ukrainians came, but foreigners. Russians, Europeans, Americans. Tours began at the tunnel entrance. Guides told the creation history, showed the massive gates where submarines entered. Groups walked through the tunnel. Those 600 meters submarines sailed underwater. Water was pumped out, except a small pool for demonstration. But the scale impression remained. In the main dock, tourists saw the huge space where submarines once stood.
Now there's a full-size model, torpedoes on racks, cranes and equipment. Guides explained repairs, torpedo loading, personnel work. They showed the arsenal, a long tunnel with torpedo racks. Real combat torpedoes, especially nuclear ones, were removed long ago. But training models remained, showing size and design. They showed living quarters, dining hall, medical unit, command center. Everywhere were stands with photos, documents, sailors' personal items. Visitors could touch Soviet submariners' daily life. Many visitors, especially older people, felt nostalgic for Soviet times. They said, "Look what structures they built, what a power, and now, everything destroyed." Indeed, comparison wasn't favorable to modernity. The museum operated about 10 years until 2014, visited by tens of thousands. It became a Crimean landmark, along with Swallow's Nest and Livadia Palace. In February-March 2014, Ukraine had a coup. Radical nationalists took power with anti-Russian positions. In Crimea, where most are Russian, unrest began. People didn't want living under Ukrainian nationalists. On March 16, 2014, Crimea held a referendum on autonomy status. Over 96% voted for reunification with Russia. On March 18th, President Vladimir Putin signed the agreement accepting Crimea into the Russian Federation. Crimea returned home to Russia. Balaklava became Russian again. And now, in 2025, this legendary base is back at the center of military activity. After Crimea's return to Russia, everything changed. The Russian Navy began moving back into this Cold War fortress, recognizing its strategic value remains. According to recent reports, Russia has reactivated this secret Soviet submarine base. The facility that served as museum is returning to military purpose. Military analysts observed increased activity around Balaklava. New security measures implemented. Access restricted again. Russian military personnel seen entering. History teaches that truth always emerges. Maybe not immediately, but eventually secrets surface. The Balaklava base proves this. What was once the USSR's most guarded secret became a museum where tourists walked freely before military secrecy returned again. And if this story says anything, it's that human ambition can create wonders, but weapons and fortresses we build often outlast the conflicts that spawned them. Time will tell what role this underground fortress plays in the 21st century. History continues, and we are its witnesses.